Well, good evening. Call to order the Wednesday, April 9th, 2014 regular session of the Bothell Planning Commission. Note that commissioners present, with the exception of Steve Booth, who's excused, and Patrick Cabe, who hopefully will be here shortly. Seeing no non-agenda public comment, no minutes to approve this evening, no new business on the agenda. We will continue the public hearing now for the 2015 Periodic Plan and Code update. This evening we'll be talking about the review of the natural environment element and the continuing review of the community services element. We'll turn it over to Mr. Bruce Blackburn. Welcome, Bruce. Good to see you again.
Good evening, Commission members. This is, of course, the third Planning Commission review on the 2015 Periodic Update Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan, specifically the natural environment element. Now, at its second hearing on March the 12th, the Planning Commission looked at this information and decided to ask for some additional background information and have a third round of discussion on the topic of climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. And essentially what I did is I placed a bunch of these concepts that the Commission had into questions that I provided with a memorandum to the Planning Commission. And it basically asked the questions like, what are greenhouse gases? Who measures the output of greenhouse gas that is being released, and what industries are measured, as well as where are the state greenhouse gas targets, where there is an authority under the state law regarding climate change provisions, where the state is in attaining its greenhouse gas emission standards, as well as, of course, is it possible for the city of Bothell to have to be in a situation where they have to ship out or export manufacturing or businesses if greenhouse gas emission targets aren't met. And finally, of course, what actions can the city of Bothell take that will have an influence upon this item that is basically has a global scope. Essentially, human-caused greenhouse gas emissions have been identified by a number of scientists that they are affecting the Earth's climate because these type of gases are capable of trapping heat within the Earth's atmosphere. Now, the state has a provision underneath RCW 7235 that defines greenhouse gases as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, and other gases or gases designated by the department. And in the case, the department is the Department of Ecology. Now, greenhouse gases are released in the atmosphere as a result of four items: stationary combustion, basically what you do with a boiler or a furnace; mobile construction, basically mobile automobiles, trucks, planes, trains, all those things; production processes that occur in manufacturing, particularly cement, aluminum, and ammonia; and fugitive releases. And those are releases that don't go through a chimney stack or an exhaust vent, but basically are released into the atmosphere just as a process of something. And the best example is there's an item called sulfur hexafluoride that's released from certain types of electrical equipment that just kind of basically gets out into the atmosphere. Now, not all greenhouse gases are equal in their heat trapping abilities. In fact, this document and this slide shows the different global warming potential of a number of different greenhouse gases. And essentially what the scientists have identified is they've given carbon dioxide a factor of 1. And then they compare that to other types of greenhouse gases, which have got anywhere from 23 to 310 up to 23,000 times more heat trapping potential than carbon monoxide. And this all goes into the analysis that the state does when they're trying to figure out where we are. Now, the United States Environmental Protection Agency and the Washington State Department of Ecology measure and monitor greenhouse gas emissions by the type of activity or sector for which the greenhouse gases are emissions. And the sectors are transportation, which is movement of vehicles; residential, commercial, and industrial, or RCI, which is fuels that are used to combust for heating, cooling, and production heating, and those kind of things; electricity generation, basically when you use fossil fuels to do that; industrial processes, when you're basically manufacturing items; agriculture; waste management; and fossil fuel industry. Now, I provided some of this information within your memorandum, but I wanted to kind of show a couple things I thought kind of really interesting. This is the greenhouse gas emission by sector that is produced within a Washington State Department of Ecology report that comes out every 2 years. The first one was 2010. This next one was, I'm sorry, the first one was 2008. The next one was 2010. And essentially what this does is this just basically shows how much greenhouse gas emissions in million metric tons of carbon monoxide equivalent within each of those sectors. And million metric ton is 2,000, a metric ton is 2,204 pounds. So million metric tons, we're talking some serious amount of basically gases that are going into the atmosphere. And I kind of thought it was interesting, this little table here that kind of shows how the greenhouse gases have increased or decreased over the years. And the state has kind of found this, but since 2007, there has been a general decrease in the amount of greenhouse gas emissions until we got to 2010 when there was a 1.6% increase. And of course, one of the other things I took away from this table that's interesting is that the vast majority of greenhouse gas emissions comes from residential, commercial, industrial, or RCI, which is heating of homes and spaces, and transportation. About 64% of those greenhouse gases come from just those two sectors. Now that's unusual because in the state of Washington we have so much hydropower. In other locations of the country, electrical generation has a higher footprint. This also kind of shows a little bit about some of the greenhouse gas emissions. This basically shows the chart since 1990 of what there is. And one of the things that was interesting is that there's a big spike in the 2000-2001 area, and the State Department of Ecology attributes that to a large decrease in the amount of aluminum production that was happening in the state of Washington in those years. And then basically it's been slowly starting to come back. This is also a chart showing the difference from 2008 to 2010 in the transportation sector. Again, small decreases across the board except for marine vessels. And essentially what the state has concluded is that there is a noticeable decreasing trend in greenhouse gas emissions since 2007, and the transportation sector has been the single largest contributor to greenhouse gases in Washington, and in 2010 accounted for almost 44% of the total statewide emissions. So transportation is a very key sector in this effort. Now, one of the things that I want to also mention that was in that report is that apparently they suspect some of this decrease is due not just to some efforts that have been going on, but also some of the reduction in the Great Recession that we just went through. They think that had some factor as well. They haven't been able to quantify that. Now, as identified, the state legislature passed RCW 7235 in 2008, and it establishes a number of provisions, including the reduction targets they've set. And the concept behind this is that the state legislatures have identified that they would like to be, the state should be equal to 1990 greenhouse gas levels by 2020, basically in another 6 years. They would like to be 25% below 1990 levels by 2035 and 50% below greenhouse gas levels by 2050, which is a pretty impressive attainment goal. One of the other things, though, that the legislature did is that they have a couple findings within their RCW, and that includes two things that are important for us. And one is to minimize the potential to export pollution, jobs, and economic opportunities, and reduce emissions at the lowest cost to Washington's economy, consumers, and businesses. So the state legislature recognizes the need to not do emission reductions such that we would be basically destroying our economy as well. And that was one of the items the Planning Commission identified. So the approach staff has taken in the third draft is essentially this. We acknowledge that there is some uncertainty regarding climate change. We also identify that it's prudent to take action to reduce human-caused greenhouse gas emissions and commits the city to that type of an effort. Focuses Bothel's policies upon reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation and RCI, residential, commercial, industrial sectors because those are sectors the city has some ability to influence. Encourages compact, walkable communities, which is a key feature of basically addressing the transportation provision. Promote energy efficiency in buildings, and incentivizes, in some cases, private developments to build green. We'll put that in parentheses. It also ensures that the city will not export population and employment growth. There's one of the policies I've drafted in there that actually specifically does that. As far as, and basically that we would not ship out industry and manufacturing or other economic provisions that we've got. And finally is that we'll reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, again, as the state has identified, as the lowest cost to Bothel's economy, residents, consumers, and businesses. So that concludes my presentation. I don't want to get in too far because I provide you such a large amount of information in the packet, but at this point, I'd be open to questions or concepts or whatever it is we decide to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any questions, points of clarification for Mr. Blackburn on his presentation before we open deliberations? Thank you, Bruce, for a comprehensive package. So with that, I would go ahead, Mike.
Well, yeah, I did have a few questions. First, that was an amazing packet. A lot of information there, and thank you for the presentation. One of the things I was wondering was when we stated about the 2020 goals. So that's creeping up real fast. Do we know? Are we on track for that?
According to the according to the latest analysis from the state, we are doing better for reducing. They do still continue to see a reduction, but we really won't have the next comprehensive analysis of that for another year almost. So I suspect that when in another year we're going to find out real quickly how we're doing as far as getting to that 1990 level, which is the next, basically the next target.
But do we know how our the most recent report compares to the 1990?
Yes, in fact. And essentially what you can see here is that in 1990, there were 88.4 million metric tons released into the atmosphere. In 2010, they had 96.1. So you can see that's the difference. And so essentially what will happen is that there's going to have to be a reduction of 8 million metric tons in the atmosphere to get to the 2020 goal.
So, Bruce, just to clarify, it looks to me that if the legislation was passed in 2008, there has been some minimal progress, at least, since 2008.
There has, and it's hard to just attribute how much of that is due to the recession, how much is due to factors like voluntary reduction goals. But it's interesting to note that from 1990 to 2005, it was about a 7% increase, and we doubled that in basically 2 years, and yet that was basically wiped out in 2 years again after 2007. Now, part of this, I suspect, and one of the things I was doing as I was reading through all these basically reports, was that they've improved their ability to measure these things as well. So some of that is is occurring as well. However, that's kind of the goal, is to get to 88.4, and right now, latest information is we're at 96.
So in terms of following these numbers, I mean, we know that we had a really large recession, and that may be explaining some of that. And my concern is just that that the economic activity would be, we don't want recessions to be, padding the numbers there. Even the aluminum plant, for example. So we've had a decrease in carbon emissions because of a decrease in aluminum production. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But part of that, I mean, I saw that there was an aluminum plant closed in Kent that cost 111 jobs. I don't want Bothell closing down sectors and losing the jobs for that, even if that's going to be helping the numbers out.
Exactly.
I'm happy to see the carbon numbers go down, but I'm concerned about the trend behind it. Closing in aluminum plants, outsourcing factories, losing jobs, and correlating with a recession. So I'm kind of mixed. Now I don't know how to translate that into some sort of specific code thing. Mm-hmm. I guess at this point I'm just sharing my reaction to the numbers with the rest of the commission.
Well, one of the things I tried to do is I tried not to include specific target reduction goals. That's basically the state's job. Our job is to take whatever we can to assist that effort. And I also duplicated in the policies, the proposed policies, those two findings from the state legislature that said we're not going to ship out factories, we're not going to damage our economy just to meet these numbers. So I put that as one of the policies within there, just to make sure that we had kind of a level of understanding as this is basically matures, and if we go through into the implementation of these things, we recognize that we're not going to say, well, this particular business over here, we know it has a bunch, we'll kick them out. That's one of the things I want to make sure was in the policies themselves.
But my concern with that was that, for the wording, we explicitly stated carbon reduction goals. We had stronger teeth there, but, we used terminology about minimizing job loss. There were no teeth behind that one, so it didn't seem, and maybe there was part of it that they were missing there. I realize it's kind of like a no-win problem. So I'm just sharing what the concerns I have are. I don't know if there's a way that we give the other half of it more teeth, and then hopefully if we state both cases well, they'll balance each other out, and the right thing will happen.
I would suggest that we actually go to the policies and goals that have been presented in this element, and let's do a review of the edits and see if there's any contribution that commissioners want to make to voice that concern. Mike?
Thanks.
So with that, I would propose that we just begin here on page NE1 and quickly flip through the pages, presuming that commissioners have had a chance to review this section. Feel free to just chime in if you have some specific comments, edits, or thoughts that you'd like to add on any of the work that staff has done. So any comments on page NE1? Moving to page NE2. On page NE3.
Just a quick question on NE3, question more than anything else. With what happened in the OSO slide, did any of that thinking or have we learned anything about that we've incorporated into this at all?
Not yet. In fact, one of the things about the OSO slide that will be interesting, there'll be a lot of analysis done on that, and we probably won't see the results of that for, I'm going to guess, probably years.
Is there potentially a moratorium on building in or around some of the areas that we have identified that have slide potentials?
Well, essentially what we did was in the city of Bothell, we do have a couple areas that have had some historic landslide activity. And within those areas, which staff knows all about, we require some pretty exhaustive analysis on that essentially identifies, okay, if you're going to build there, how are you going to build so you do it in a way that one doesn't, basically the house doesn't slip down and also does not affect your neighbors. We have a pretty good balance of information that's been going up there now. And so far, we haven't had any big ones recently. Even with all the rain we had as well.
Next set of edits or comments that staff has made begins on page NE8. Page NE9. Page NE10, page NE11, page NE12, NE13, NE14, NE15, NE16, change to the title on NE17, changes on NE18.
It's not a change. I just thought you did a great job on NE P42, capturing the concerns and articulating that very well. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Page NE19.
Yeah, I had one there. Under any P44, in the list of ways that we can minimize greenhouse gas emissions, one of the things that we've talked about adding to the list has been promoting local businesses, with the goal that if I've got a 12-mile commute. If I could get a job in North Creek and have a 2-mile commute, that would save me a lot more than any of the other bus or Prius or other proposals out there.
Mike, are you able to articulate that in the form of a specific bullet item or language that staff could take under advisement?
Sure. Promoting local businesses to minimize driving distances for commuters. And if anyone's got a better way to say it, that'd be great.
Let me ask a question of staff, or Bruce. Maybe this would help in your feedback. Is there something related to the concept or the policies of trip reduction that might fit here, or do you have other comments that you'd like to add?
Well, I was kind of trying to get to what Mike had identified in a kind of a roundabout way. Again, this is the natural environment policy, so it's not really the best place in the world to put things about economic development and location of jobs, because that's primarily land use and the economic development element. However, I was trying to get there by hitting it in both 43 and 44, i.e., employment, population growth in the city's activity centers. Let's see, here's on hand. And then in 44, it was basically that encouraging mass transit, non-motorized, and other forms of transit that does not rely upon single-occupant vehicle trips. What Mike is talking about is something that's a little bit different, though, and that's basically to encourage employment centers and population centers within the same area. That's kind of that global walkable communities definition. It was kind of how I was approaching that. But it sounds like you're kind of looking for something that's a little more definitive than that.
Yeah, and it's not an alternative; it's an addition. I'd love to be able to have a job in North Creek, and if it's closer, then even you get a bit of success. Things like bicycling to work become more viable, or even walking. But if for people with a 25 mile commute that's not on a bus line, they don't really have a lot of options. So I see about the diversity, in P44. I kind of see it's an important problem, and we're just listing all sorts of different ways. We're trying to be as creative as we can for different ways to solve that.
So NEP 43, the first bullet, would that be a place where you'd like to see some enhancement, perhaps? Because again, it's referring to the climate change, which is kind of the broader element of that. Yeah. That's a really good point. I guess I'm struggling what the difference is between P43 and P44, because we've kind of used climate change and minimizing greenhouse gases interchangeably. A little bit. And the differences are a little bit subtle, because I was trying to get back into the mode of trying to comply with the King County and Snohomish County countywide planning policies, and they have a little bit of a shift when they talk about climate change and greenhouse gases. So I was kind of trying to follow that by greenhouse gases is probably the thing that City of Bothell is going to do basically to reduce our impact upon climate change. And they're a little more definitive. I added just a little bit more information to those. For example, when I talk about increasing and encouraging the use of low-emission vehicles such as efficient energy-powered, that's a fairly specific thing that is basically targeted right against greenhouse gas emissions. So I was trying to follow that balance. But you're right. I mean, in theory, you could just have one big, long list. But, again, I'm trying to make sure when I fill up my findings for you guys that you can say, yes, we comply with King and Snohomish County countywide planning policies. And they reference both items. So. However, I'm still trying to think of how I can address your need. Is it something along the lines of continue to promote employment centers and mixed population and employment centers, or encourage more population within, next to the employment centers and stuff like that? Is that kind of what you're looking for?
I think actually the way it's written, if I kind of group P43 and P44 mentally in one long list, I think that works for me.
Okay.
Thanks.
I know it doesn't say exactly what you were trying to get, but
No, that's fine. I think it captures the essence. I just had to kind of shift the way I was interpreting it a little bit.
fair enough. I had to
Thank
do that.
you.
Quick question on NEP 44, the very last bullet item there. Have we thought about, or do we have plans to put charging stations in the downtown redevelopment section where for electric vehicles?
We actually just did a code amendment that basically encouraged that type of, and I'm going to look at Bill and see if he can remember what the actually standard was.
I don't recall that.
Yeah, but there is a provision that says you will have at least a certain number of parking stalls that have the ability to be recharging stations. So
Excellent. Thank you.
we have something in the codes already.
Moving on to NE 20. NE 21. NE 22. NE 23. And NE 24. Bruce, I just had one comment on the last edit on NE 24. And this may just simply be my sense of reading. The A23 is extremely specific with regard to a specific action, which may be more appropriate in a capital facilities plan or in the city's budget or work that was done on a staff or department level. What was the rationale for adding this at a policy level?
Well, essentially what I did is I just took one of the actions out of the utilities and conservation element and put it into here. Because remember, we're changing the utilities and conservation element quite not severely, but quite a bit. And this is one of those actions that was floating out there, so it landed here. Basically, that's how simple it is.
And in staff's opinion, is this maybe a little more specific than is needed in?
No, I don't think so, because, reclaimed water is one of those things that is a big action that's been going on. Now, it's taken a little bit of a hiatus because, everybody's got a little bit of budget issues going on. But it has been in the background, still percolating. And I think that eventually you'll see more and more of this happening. Will it happen in the city of Bothell? Maybe not for a long time. But it'll probably be according to, the golf courses in Redmond and those places. That's probably where you'll see the first application of these type of proposals.
And do you see Brightwater as the only reclaimed water opportunity in the city of Bothell?
Oh, that's a good point. It may not be. That's correct.
So I would just propose investigate the feasibility of using reclaimed water for irrigation and other purposes
Yeah, we can
and
just take
pursue if
Brightwater
found
out, yeah.
cost effective.
Okay.
Thank you. Any comments or thoughts on the maps?
I have a general question. I see the goals that we have, but thinking back, we were talking about increasing from 20 units per acre in the discussions we had like 2 weeks ago, which means we're increasing the populations. So how is that in line with these goals?
Well, essentially, one of the things that we can do as a city is we can encourage more growth close in. And basically what that means is we can have more population, more housing closer to more employment centers, and that helps reduce the amount of the need for people to hop in their car and drive to the next, down the street or across the city or something like that. So having some pretty good population areas next to our employment centers, which is kind of what we've been talking about, particularly in the Canyon Park area, really is one of the main actions we can take because it attracts right at that transportation sector issue. At 44% of the amount of greenhouse gases released, that's a huge factor that if we can continue to have people locate close to their jobs, it really does cut down on how many people have to hop in their car and drive someplace.
Thank you.
Yep, that's a good question.
So with that, I believe that we had a recommendation in the packet tonight that we could deliberate on these amendments and approve preliminary recommendations for the natural environment element. And with that, take a motion to move forward with approving the natural environment element with the edits noted in tonight's conversation.
I'll motion to approve the natural environment elements with the edits that we've discussed.
Second?
Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Note that the motion passes unanimously with those commissioners present this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Well done.
Thanks, Bruce. Well done.
With that, we will turn to the second review of the community services element. And at this time, we'll turn it over to Planning Director, Mr. Bill Weislogel.
Thanks, Peter, and good evening, Commission members. This is the second review of the community services element. A little bit of recap here. Community services is not a required element under the Growth Management Act. It's not even listed as an optional element, nor does the GMA provide any kind of direction as to what community services policies might look like. But it was, and it's never been, even going back to the original adoption of the GMA back in 1990, community services was never mentioned in the GMA. But Bothell included it as an element in the original plan because the community wanted to make sure that the plan was inclusive of all aspects of city life. Also, at the time, the city owned a building that was occupied by a human service provider. That was the multi-service center building, which used to be north of the Dawson building and was demolished in 2010. And also back in the early 90s, the funding of human services was pretty much on an ad hoc basis. That's not true anymore. So on March 12th, when I first brought this to you, staff proposed eliminating the community services element for some of the reasons that I already mentioned. It's not required by GMA. There aren't any GMA goals concerning community services, but also because staff resources, which have dwindled significantly since the 90s, are more importantly focused on other tasks. There was language in the community services element that talked about giving special treatment to human services agencies. That's not really necessary. And then, as I said before, we have a human services funding process in place. The exception that I mentioned on March 12th had to do with fitness-related policies and actions, and that's because the GMA was fairly recently amended to require in the land use element the addressing of or inclusion of planning approaches that increase physical activity. So to comply with that GMA requirement, staff proposed to relocate 2 policies and 2 implementing actions that promoted physical fitness. All right, so at the March 12th meeting, the Commission supported the elimination of this element as a standalone element, but commissioners wanted some goals, policies, and actions retained. So towards the end of that meeting, Commissioner Booth volunteered to identify some text that he felt warranted retention, and to coordinate with staff on those revisions. So over the last few weeks, Commissioner Booth and I have been communicating and led to these proposed revisions. First of all, the proposal is to retain certain goals, policies, and actions that pertain to human services categories in which the city has actual influence. Now, there were a number of goals, policies, and actions before that had to do with agencies that we didn't control. I mean, there were aspirational kinds of policies and actions, but we had no say as to whether they were realized or not. So the second part of this would be to relocate those goals, policies, and actions to the retained ones to the housing element, and then retitle that element Housing and Human Services. That's in bigger cities and in counties that have enough revenue that they can support their own human services departments. This is a fairly common pairing of housing and human services. So in your packet, the text that is proposed to be relocated, plus a couple of new policies, have been shown in highlight to make them stand out. So our recommendation on this item is that the Commission accept public testimony, deliberate, and then preliminarily approve the deletion of the community services element with retention and relocation of certain sections to the retitled Housing and Human Services element. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Any questions or points of clarification for Mr. Weislogel? Bill, just quickly, I know there's a real passion from Commissioner Booth for this matter. I know that he's spent a lot of time with you over the last couple of weeks. It's unfortunate that he wasn't able to be here tonight. You have probably had more conversation with him than anybody over the last several weeks. What are your thoughts on waiting until April 30th for him to be back to be able to participate in any deliberation or final discussion before we preliminarily approve this?
Well, it's certainly an option, and if you feel comfortable doing that, that would we could certainly support that. He did concur in the changes proposed, although he did indicate that he'd like to keep the conversation going. So if you'd like to continue it to the 30th, given Commissioner Booth's interest in this subject, feel free.
Got a question, sir. From my experience, these services probably will not go away in the city of Bothell. So how do we propose that? Where do we think we're going to be able to serve the population that need those part of services?
Well, there's language and there's retained language that it says the city does care for vulnerable populations, and that the city does believe it's still important to fund agencies that serve those people. But that's not going away. What would be eliminated would be the profiles, the descriptions of all these agencies, because they do change over time, and agencies do come and go, and sometimes they merge. And so what we found was that the profile section, the descriptions, became out of date literally within months of writing it. So we're proposing to eliminate those. And I guess the other issue is that there are certain things that the city can control, and there are certain things that it can't. It's a little misleading and I guess not productive to have a number of aspirational goals and policies about things that we can't really control. We need the plan to be meaningful and not just page after page of platitudes. So this was an attempt by Commissioner Booth, working with staff, to winnow down the language in the community services element to those policies and actions that we actually can affect.
So these the agencies you refer to are within the city, or are these agencies that work with the city?
Well, they work in the city. They may not even be located in the city, but they may serve vulnerable populations
I saw
in
Hope
the
Link
city.
come up there, which was one of the agencies, right?
Pardon me?
Hope Link
Yes.
came up in it.
Well, that's a good example. That's a really good example. They're no longer in Bothell, but they serve Bothell.
Okay. Thank you.
So soliciting input from the commissioners regarding whether to defer this to April 30th to allow Commissioner Booth to participate in final deliberations and approval. I don't imagine that would take very long, or whether we should move forward tonight.
I'm just thinking that, he's had such an interest in this, and he obviously did a lot of work. I'm fine with moving it to the 30th. Once he gets here, if he does have concerns, we can move right along and move it on. So I'm in favor of moving it forward to the 30th.
So with that, I'll solicit a motion to defer preliminary recommendations on the community services element until April 30th.
Yeah, I move that we, at this time, continue the hearing for the periodic plan update for community service until April 30th.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Note the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Weislogel.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Moving further down the agenda, there is no study session tonight, but there is old business, and I just would look to staff to make any comment regarding the old business on the agenda.
Yeah, again, this is the only place we could figure out to put these items. When you preliminarily approve an element, we want you to have it. We want you to have it in the so far final form so you can keep it for your records. And so this is the way we're choosing to get it to you. So it comes with the packet. It's not really a discussion item. It's for you to, you can tear it out of the packet and put it in a binder if you want.
So do we, that's a lot of material. Does that accumulate for each future packet? I'm just thinking about if we can save some paper here. Or does it only show up once?
It would only show up once. So in other words, a couple of weeks ago, or at your last meeting, we sent you the preliminarily approved vision statement and some other element. When we as staff are leapfrogging on this, it's really hard to keep track. Annexation element. So that was sent to you once. You could keep that for future reference, or you could toss it out. It's not as if in every packet you're going to get all of the elements that have been preliminarily approved.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Moving down the agenda, any other reports from staff?
No.
Any reports from members? With that, I'll seek a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.